Hello, this is a video essay introducing body politics from an intersectional lens. Basically, that has to do with bodies that are not white or able or cis hetero, etc. How were viewed in Europe? What is the Eurocentric narrative that has been spread to the entire world through colonization? So our story starts in Greece. And I want to start by talking about a very important Greek term, which is called kalos kagathos. Kalos kagathos means gorgeous to look at, and also it means a good person. It combines both beauty and wellness of character. In the 6th century BC, Pythagoras discovered the golden ratio, and he said that this is how the perfect bodies and the perfect anything that is perfectly beautiful in nature has to possess the golden ratio in its geometry. So basically, a beautiful face, a beautiful body, etc. And in the great spirit of Kalos Kagathos, it was also very well discussed and known in Greece that faces and bodies that possess the golden ratio were the faces of people who have good manners. And then we can jump 1 century later to the famous playwright Aristophanes, who actually wrote down the characteristics of beautiful people, beautiful men and women. For example, he said that beautiful men have a gleaming chest and broad shoulders and shiny skin and small penises, because large penises were considered a sign of vulgarity and lack of self-control. With women, while the standards were a little bit different, they had to have long wavy hair, round buttocks, and a gentle face, and it was preferred for women to have a little bit extra body fat, because that reflects on that woman's health and that she eats well, especially that they were famines and times of poverty in ancient Greece. And influenced by both Pythagoras and Aristophanes, thinker and philosopher Aristotle, less than another century later, started the pseudoscience of physiognomy, which is reading faces and reading the character of people through their features, especially their facial features. And physiognomy has been used until the end of World War II, maybe the end of like in the beginning of the 20th century. A lot of people believed in it. A lot of scholars believed in it. It was used to make friends, life partners, business partners, in courts of law, to separate the innocent from the guilty, and also by teachers at school to decide which curricula to give to which students based on their features. And then we take a jump to medieval Europe and medieval art, and how non-Christians were depicted and called in that period of time, because there was a movement of painting called the monstrous races. The monstrous races basically were figures of people who had the heads of animals, or who had dismantled bodies, or they looked extremely disfigured, and they represented the non-Christians or the Christian heretics in medieval Europe. And it's important here also to note to medieval theologians how they talked about the fall of Satan from heaven to hell, and how his skin got burnt and turned black, but he was white in the beginning. And then that turned into an entire artistic movement of painting the body of the Christ as a white figure, whereas Satan was painted as a completely black figure. And dark skin was associated with the evil brought to the world by non-Christians. And let's take another jump to the early 19th century and talk about the sad story of Sarah Bartman. Sarah Bartman was a Khoikhoi woman, which is a South African tribe, who was taken as a slave to Europe to be exhibited in freak shows and the salons and parties of rich people because she had a body type that was uncommon in Western Europe. She became the subject of scientific interest and erotic projection in Europe. And she was taken to London and Paris, and she was called the Hottentot Venus. Hottentot is an offensive term, and this is how the people of South Africa were called by the colonizers, the people from that specific tribe, because they had a language that had a lot of tongue clicking, so they were making fun of their language, of their tongue. And it's important here to also make a stop and think about our voice and our language and how they could be subjects of racism, and how our voice embodies our DNA and the essence of our being. Because every one of us has a unique voice, right? That there's like even a voice fingerprint. Anyway, let's go back to Sarah Bartman, who was miserable, poor. She used to be displayed naked, sometimes with a collar around her neck. People used to poke at her with sticks or with their fingers. She was considered a freak. Sarah died at the age of 26. And she was very young, of course. And here I am quoting the anatomist who did her autopsy. I've never seen a human head so similar to that of an ape. Missing link between man and beast. Her small ears were similar to those of an orangutan. And when alive, she was as quick as a monkey. Her arms were slender, her back is graceful, her feet are charming and pretty. Cuvier, which is the scientist who did her dissection, belonged to a movement that believed in a hierarchy of races with Europeans on tops. And this is when physiognomy married anthropology. And Sarah was not the only case. There were other cases of black women that were used as specimens to separate the savage woman from the civilized female. Sarah Bartman's genitals and her skull were displayed in the Musée de l'Homme in France for 150 years, along with a cast of her buttocks. And her remains were asked for to be returned in the 1970s by a South African rebel, Nelson Mandela, and they were finally buried in her homeland. She is seen as a symbol and a basis for the definition of our society's other. And now let's take a jump to a court case in the US in 1976. The case was the Graffenried versus General Motors, when 4 black women accused General Motors for discriminating against them for being black women. And well, the General Motors lawyer argued that since the company hires black men, then this disproves racism. And since the company hires white women, this disproves gender discrimination, gender-based discrimination. And the case was dismissed because they were treated separately as women and as black, but not together as black women. This is one of the important cases that lawyer and scholar Kimberly Crenshaw used to coin the term intersectionality in 1989, which is the interlocking systems of power that affects those who are most marginalized in the society. And it opposes treating each axis in isolation. This movement has been criticized a lot, of course, by cis hetero rich white men for being seen as a hierarchy of oppression with them at the bottom of it. However, this movement, and I'm quoting Kimberly Crenshaw, is not concerned with shallow questions of identity and representation, but more interested in deep structural and systematic questions about discrimination and inequality. So, I hope that video was useful in shedding a light on intersectionality and literature that has to do with it and with the emergence of that movement and why it's important to address all the axes of power that affect us. And I would like at the end to read a short poem by Audre Lorde. It's called A Litany for Survival. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward at once before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures, like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard, nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it's better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. Thank you for listening.